Included are the B-52H co-pilot, O2 forward air controller in Vietnam, putting in airstrikes over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos, T-37 instructor pilot, training future Air Force pilots, FB-111 fighter bomber, nuclear mission and instructor pilot, and we have a canopy of that aardvark in the lower hangar in our museum. Military staff assignments, Pentagon action officer, headquarters and Air Training Command at Randolph Air Force Base, Texas, Director of Programs. Headquarters with the 12th Air Force, Bergstrom Air Force Base, Texas, Director of Programs. Joe's aviation industry work experience includes McDonnell Douglas, Deputy Program Manager, T-1A Tanker Transport Training System, Beechcraft Program Manager, T-6 Texan II, Air Force Navy Aircraft Primary Training System. Joe has a family of fine Americans serving our country in the Marines, and that's what we're going to talk about in our presentation today. But Joe's son-in-law just made Brigadier General. Adolfo Garcia, Commanding General, 7 Marine Corps Installations East. Their grandson is a Second Lieutenant, Daniel Garcia, and an artillery officer. And their other grandson, Jack Garcia, is a Marine pilot candidate. Joe's also been a volunteer out at the Warhawk for 6 years. And really Joe's story today, he's the nephew of Uncle Charles Kubish, who fought with the 3rd Marine Division on Iwo Jima. The story you're going to hear today, after many years of finally opening up about his experience on Iwo Jima and the Japanese mortar attack while attacking the 2nd Airfield on Iwo Jima with 2 Marines on each side, both of whom were killed. The story was captured in Martha McCallum's book, Unknown Valor, a story of family, courage, and sacrifice from Pearl Harbor to Iwo Jima. It's a story of Marines of unknown valor, among them Joe's Uncle Charlie. I love interacting with Joe out at the museum. He's just such a professional, and we're so lucky to have him out here, and really excited that you all get to see this presentation today. I've seen it twice now, and it is a very moving presentation, so I promise you it was worth coming out to see this in the snow today. So without further ado, Mr. Joe Grubiak.
Good morning. Everybody hear me okay? All right. What a wonderful turnout given all the weather that we've had here this morning over here. You just can't stop these veterans. How many Marines do we have in the audience? Raise your hand. Okay. Very good. Well, as you know, the month of February is a very memorable month for Marines. In fact, last month, February 19th was the 79th anniversary of the landing on Iwo Jima. And a couple days later, on February the 23rd, was the raising of the flag at Mount Suribachi. So as Carson said, today's presentation is about my Uncle Charlie, 3rd Marine Division, and many Marines who fought with him. So next chart. Next chart. So like many of you here, you probably had loved ones or family members that served in World War II. I had three uncles. My Uncle Stevie, who was in the Army, Steve Donchis. My Uncle Charles Donchis, who was in the Navy, and my Uncle Charlie, who was in Marines. They never talked about their experience in World War II, but I can tell you they were very, very proud to have served in our service and our country. Next chart. So my Uncle Charlie grew up on a farm in Hellertown, Pennsylvania. He was one of 7 children. At 5 years old, his mother died. When he was in 6th grade, his father pulled him out of school to help on the farm. And he did that until he met my Aunt Ethel. Next chart. They moved into town in Bethlehem. He became a fireman with the Bethlehem Steel. Because he was supporting the war effort, he had a deferment. So with the war raging on in Europe in the summer of 1944, D-Day, as well as what was going on in the Pacific in terms of the island hopping campaign, he wanted to do his part. Next chart, please. And so, married to my Aunt Ethel, with a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old, he decided to join the Marines. Went to Paris Island, went on to Camp Pendleton, boarded ship in San Diego for points unknown in the Pacific. Next chart. So when my Aunt Ethel died, I reached out to Uncle Charlie and reconnected. And I would call him every Saturday. I would visit him when I went home to Bethlehem. And he finally started to open up a little bit about his experience in Iwo Jima. And the story he told me the most was the day he, running with 2 Marines on either side, towards the 2nd airfield on Iwo Jima, where they were mortared. Herman Grader, next chart, which was on his left side, and another Marine on his right side. Herman Grader, the night before, told my Uncle Charlie told me the story, said, Charlie, if something happens to me tomorrow, make sure you give me my watch to my parents. It was almost like he had a premonition. So, next chart. So when Uncle Charlie turned 100 years old, the local Marines unit there paid him a visit. And it was a nice celebration, and it was right after that that the family contacted me and said, Joe, we think Uncle Charlie is the last living Iwo Jima veteran. Could you find out? Well, Marine headquarters doesn't keep records like that. So what I did was I contacted Iwo Jima Association of America, wrote a nice email, sent it to him, and he came back to me, very nice, and basically said, we think he's one of the oldest. Well, unknown to me, that email went around to other people, and I got a call from a Marine searcher named Dean Lauback. And Dean had met Uncle Charlie, and he knew about the mortar attack and 2 Marines getting killed next to him. So Marianne and I were going to Arlington, Virginia. Her dad was being buried at Arlington, and I told him when we're going up to Pennsylvania to see him. He said, would you do me a favor, Joe? I said, sure. He said, I'm going to send you a picture, next chart, of Harry Gray. And he said, I want you to ask him if Harry Gray was one of the Marines that was killed with him during the mortar attack. And so, after Arlington, Marianne and I went up to Pennsylvania, surrounded by his family in the retirement home. I brought up the subject of the mortar attack, and I said, Uncle Charlie, you always talk about Herman Grader on the left side, but you never say anything about, to me, on the right side, who the Marine was. And I showed him the picture. And I said, you know who this is? And he said, yeah, that's Gray, my foxhole buddy. 100% confirmation. So when we left the retirement home, I called Dean Lauback and I said, hey Dean, 100% confirmation that the Marine on Uncle Charlie's right side is Harry Gray. He said, I'll call you right back. So in 5 minutes he calls me back and he said, Joe, I couldn't tell you this before, but Harry Gray is Martha McCullum's uncle. And she's writing a book about the Pacific, and she would like to meet him. And I said, when? He said, how about Wednesday? This is Saturday. So I put Marianne on an airplane back to Boise on Monday. I stayed with them because I wanted them to be comfortable. And sure enough, on Wednesday, Martha McCullum came. Next chart. So she wrote a book called Unknown Valor. As Carson said, what it's about is family courage, sacrifice, time period between Pearl Harbor and really Iwo Jima. And what it is all about is really honoring those Marines of uncommon valor. And among them were several. There was Herman Grader, and there was Harry Gray that were killed next to my Uncle Charlie, and where Uncle Charlie was severely wounded. There was George Colburn. George Colburn was Harry Gray's best friend. Their families knew one another. George saw the mortar attack where Harry got killed. He could never get over this, and you're going to understand why here when you see the video. And then there was Woody Williams. Woody Williams was the last flamethrower in his unit. Knocked out several enemy pillboxes. In one instance over there, he ran up and stuffed his flamethrower nozzle down a ventilation pipe, neutralizing the pillbox. On another occasion, there was a large advance of Japanese infantry, and he took care of them with a flamethrower. Woody received the Medal of Honor. And then there was Dominic Rossi. Dominic Rossi was a star football player, University of Buffalo, destined for the pros. He wanted to serve his country. He went into the Marines, became a second lieutenant, and he, with his unit, are up there in the 2nd Airfield, fierce fighting, hand-to-hand combat, gets wounded. They evacuate him to a ship off the coast of Iwo Jima. He was there a couple days. He wanted to go back to his Marines. He went back to Marines, and he got killed by a sniper, received the Navy Cross. And then there's Rondo Sharf, Higgins boat driver, all right, delivering Marines to the Iwo Jima beach. Emotional story with Rondo, where he's talking to the Marines who have fallen and saying, let's make a bargain. Well, I'll come down there and spend a weekend, and you come up here and see the life that I led. And then there's Uncle Charlie. They used to call him Pop. Japanese shrapnel in him until the day he passed away. So the next one, please. What you're going to see here is the story of unknown valor as told by Martha McCullum. Maybe you've seen her. I want to say a few words. Maybe you've seen her on her program where she honors veterans. She usually does that at appropriate times. Wonderful person and very close to our military. So if you would please. All right.
"75 years ago, this remote island of Iwo Jima in the Pacific was the site of one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. This tiny southern outpost of Japan was the first battle of World War II to be fought on Japanese soil. With the Marines now at their door, the Japanese fought to defend Iwo with all they had. Today, it is a quiet, sacred place, its past as dark as the thick black sand of its beaches. Here, our men fought, and nearly 7,000 of them died over 36 days to wrest this crucial airfield en route to mainland Japan. Some were hailed as heroes. Others showed small acts of bravery and brotherhood known only to those with whom they fought and served. This is the story of their unknown valor. I'm Martha McCallum. Growing up, my mother, Betty McCallum, told us the story of her cousin, Harry Gray. She shared with us his touching letters. In the summer of 1944, at 18, he left Arlington, Massachusetts, just after high school graduation, to join the Marines and serve in the Pacific. I was always intrigued and moved by these letters. I knew very little of the Battle of Iwo Jima, but I knew Harry's death there left a deep grief in my mother's family. A few years ago, I decided to tell his story. It struck me that in war movies, there are the heroes, and then there are hundreds of others. The guys who get hit on the beach or in the villages, just trying to carry out the mission. They are the extras in the movie, but for some families somewhere, they are their Harry Gray, their lost love, the line on the family tree that just ends. A young man who never got to have a life, get married, grow old. To learn about Harry and what happened to him on March 13, 1945, I started with a trip to Elmira, New York to visit his sister, my Aunt Nancy. She told me about their lives growing up with her mom, my great Aunt Anne, my grandfather's sister, and her dad, Harry Gray Sr.
This is at the beach, and this is my brother right here.
Oh, look how cute. He's a blondie.
We were a very close family.
Was he very protective of you?
I think he was. I didn't really have an opportunity to see very much of that.
Just weeks before Christmas in 1938, tragedy struck the family. Harry Sr. died suddenly of heart failure, making Harry Jr. the man of the house at just 12 years old.
My life totally changed after that. And my brother's totally changed too. We didn't have any money because my father had only paid into Social Security for 2 years, and you had to pay in for 3 years before you could collect. So my mother went to work.
It was with Harry's letters home, as well as those of his pal George Colburn, that I began. But I soon realized the story of Iwo Jima begins at Pearl Harbor.
December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
On September 1st, 1939, Hitler's invasion of Poland triggered the beginning of World War II. Prime Minister Winston Churchill was determined to convince President Roosevelt to help Great Britain beat back the Nazi aggression in Europe before it stretched across the Channel to England. It was a fight America wanted nothing to do with after the devastating losses of World War I. But after Japan's vicious surprise attack at Pearl Harbor, the United States was at war. Young men across the country lined up to enlist and join the fight. Boys like Harry Gray in Arlington, Massachusetts, George Colburn in neighboring Medford, who played football with Harry and whose mother was friendly with Harry's mom, Dominic Grossi in Lockport, New York, Herman Grader of Dayton, Ohio, Charles Gubish of Hellertown, Pennsylvania, Woody Williams of Quiet Dell, West Virginia, and Rondo Scharf of Chicago. They joined thousands of others who were champing at the bit to fight the Japanese.
You know, it was the generation back then. You know, your country was at war, you wanted to do something to help.
Nancy remembers it well.
So many of the boys at that time, they were all so patriotic, and they thought it was their duty to save the country.
But I said I'm joining the Marines because I like the uniform.
When my after my 18th birthday, why I told Mom I'm going into the Marine Corps. I did know the difference between a Marine and an Army guy, because a Marine had a very attractive uniform. They could really get the girls, and that appealed. So
They were off to Paris Island. There they would train and become Marines.
I remember my mother did not want him to become a Marine. She would prefer to have him in the Navy because then he would have a bed to sleep in instead of a foxhole.
Harry graduated high school, kissed his girlfriend Dot goodbye, and vowed to marry her when he got home. In the summer of 1944, he was off to Paris Island for training. He wrote to Uncle Frank, my grandfather, who was like a father to him after his dad died.
We do calisthenics every morning until we almost collapse, but we try to keep going. Yesterday, we drilled in the sun at 120 degrees wearing full combat gear. We kept this up until 3 fellows collapsed. This place is so nerve-wracking that one fellow from another platoon tried to commit suicide last night by cutting his throat. Just by chance, they found him before he died.
Charles Gubish remembers well how tough it was.
If I would have had a gun or something like that, I'd have did the same thing. Because it was tough. But they made a Marine out of it.
While researching Unknown Valor, I discovered that my friend, Nicky Errico's uncle, was also killed on Iwo Jima. A long talk led to the unraveling of his amazing heroism. His name was Dominic Grossi of Lockport, New York. A high school and college football star, he turned down an offer to play for the New York Giants, determined instead to fight for his country.
That was his dream. He wanted to play football. And the war started, and he tried the military, and he told them, I really want to play football, and I'll play when I get home.
he came home one day and started talking about the Marines, and of course I think my mom and dad were both surprised about that because he was still going to college, but they gave him their blessings, and he did. He joined the Marines.
Grossi was quickly recognized as a leader during officer training at Quantico in Virginia. He became a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. In October of 1944, their training complete, newly minted Marines Harry Gray, Herman Grader, Charlie Gubish, and George Coburn were assigned to the 34th replacement draft. They would stop in California and then on to the Pacific. Lieutenant Grossi was eager to get to the battle.
I'm sort of glad I'm starting. I'm tired of standing by and waiting. I think I'm going to enjoy the coming adventure.
February 1945. World War II had been raging for nearly 6 years. As Allied forces fought the Nazis in Europe, America was virtually alone in the battle against the Japanese in the Pacific. U.S. forces battled across the Stepping Stone Islands, securing them one by one, killing enemy fighters and regaining the pivotal airfields on each, from the Solomons to the Gilberts and Marshall Islands to the Marianas, inching closer to mainland Japan.
Ahead now stood Iwo Jima, the most heavily fortified island in the world. Buried deep underground, 20,000 of their toughest fighting men waited for us to make the first move.
Most of us couldn't figure out why we were taking that wee little place and why we needed so many Marines to do it.
U.S. bomber jets and battleships had been pummeling the island of Iwo Jima for months, attempting to cripple Japanese defenses. The objective was to secure the island and its 2 airstrips as a necessary stopover for battle-damaged B-29s on their way to and from bombing runs to mainland Japan. But there was only so much bombardment could achieve. The 22,000 Japanese fighters weren't on the island, they were in the island. The Imperial Army had spent months digging into the hard surface and building an underground city, complete with hospitals, command centers, and sleeping quarters. It was the plan of General Tadamichi Kurabayashi. His family military history stretched back to the samurais, but Kurabayashi was a man of the world. He had lived and worked in the United States for years as a military attaché. He knew the ingenuity and tenacity of the Americans. He also knew that victory, given Japan's battered navy and air power, was impossible. But he would make sure that the U.S. paid a heavy price for Iwo. His laws of battle for his men commanded each to kill at least 10 Americans before they died in combat or their final act of sacrifice for the emperor, suicide. On the brink of battle, Kurabayashi watched the sea from his command post, waiting for the attack. Just beyond his sights, General Holland, Howlin' Mad, Smith, and his naval armada were approaching.
D-Day, beginning of the toughest days in Marine Corps history. When this flag drops, our landing craft will head for the beach.
Marines descended on Iwo Jima.
They lead the way to the conquest of the island that guards Japan's front door. They're going on the toughest assignment of Marine Corps history. The first wave of troops has gotten ashore.
We're all jacked up, you know, pull my boat alongside, and the guys are coming down in the nets, dropping into the boat. And we head in there, and I had full throttle when we started getting closer.
This is an historical film record of the first boats pushing on shore at Iwo Jima.
500 landing craft in 10 waves advance on 3,000 yards of beach.
The troops are United States Marines, and they're on their way to write new pages of leatherneck heroism.
Marines of the 4th and 5th Divisions landed with only scant resistance at first, leading them to believe the bombing campaign had been a success. But Then, the 36-day hell that would become Iwo Jima began. General Kobayashi held his fire, waiting for the beaches to become congested with Marines. And then he began unleashing on the 4th and 5th Divisions, now deep in enemy territory. Landing vehicles were piling up on the water's edge. Once out of them, the men struggled on the terraces of ashy volcanic sand. It sucked in their boots, their backs heavy with gear.
There was no protection except shell craters, where they'd drop bombs or artillery or whatever.
"24 hours after the battle began, more than 500 Americans were dead, and nearly 2,000 wounded. Thousands more bounced around on the choppy sea, waiting to be sent into battle.
We sat out there for several days, waiting to see if they were going to use us. When we finally got ashore, just before noon on the 20th. We had to cross that first airfield. We lost a tremendous number of Marines.
Charlie remembers.
There was a pile of Japs covered with ponchos. And somebody said, "Look at them Japs. They got shoes like we do." They pull the sheet up, and they weren't Japs, they were Marines.
There was an odor of death on the island, you know. I guess dead bodies, a lot of Japanese, a lot of Marine kids.
I was so disgusted. If a Jap would have shot me, I'd have thanked him.
On Iwo Jima's southern end looms the volcano Mount Suribachi. On the 5th day of the battle, U.S. forces fought their way to the top.
Admiral Turner gives the order to cease fire. Our guns are quiet as they make the climb. We wait for a sign. Suribachi is ours.
The moment immortalized in this iconic photo symbolized a war that, while coming to an end, was far from over. On Iwo Jima, Dominic Grassi led Company K, 21st Marines, in one of the most vicious battles of the 5-week struggle. They were fighting to beat back Japanese resistance at a ridge near the 2nd Airfield.
February 24th, 1945, they were assigned to get the Motoyama airstrip number 2. The first 2 attempts weren't successful and many men fell. But they got to the top of the hill and the Japanese were waiting for them.
He survived the battle and was awarded the Navy Cross for his valor, one of only 10 recipients on Iwo Jima. His citation read, "Second Lieutenant Grassi led his unit against the Japanese with dauntless courage, slashing right and left with his bayonet, thrusting grenades into massive emplacements sunk in the sands, dropping them behind rocks, sweeping aside the enemy, holding desperately and fighting furiously in hand-to-hand engagements as he smashed through a sector swarming with Japanese to gain a 50-foot ridge on the opposite side of the airstrip."
Trying to take that airfield, they all had to do hand-to-hand combat fighting. He was really so brave. That's the day that he really got the Navy Cross for.
After that battle, he sent a letter home from the hospital ship, but mentioned neither his wounds nor his heroism.
Dearest Mother, I've been doing a little moving lately, and that's the reason I haven't written. I know you're worried, but everything's all right. I'm on Iwo Jima, and it's really a hot spot. It's just about secured, and we'll move back to Guam in a day or 2. I just finished a hot bacon and egg cracker sandwich with a hot cup of coffee. First hot stuff in about 5 days. Give my love to Daddy and the children. Your son, Dom.
Not far from that ridge was the young flamethrower operator from West Virginia. He was considered too short for the Marines when he first tried to enlist. Herschel Woody Williams.
We'd been there for 2 days. Lost so many people. The commanding officer asked me, as the only flamethrower operator left, could I do something about some of these pillboxes that had it stalled? My remark was, I'll try. So he told me to picked 4 Marines to help me. And I just said, you and you. Yeah, there were just Marines. 2 of those Marines that day sacrificed their lives protecting mine. Never knew who they were. Never did know them. That impacted, but loss is loss, and you sort of accept those things after a while.
Williams is the last surviving Iwo Jima Medal of Honor recipient. Lieutenant Grassi insisted on going back to Iwo after he recovered. He was killed on March 8th on his way toward the ocean in the final days of the fight.
He could have come home. And sadly, trying to take the airfield, it's when he was shot down. And we do know it was shot in the head, and it was a quick death. So we're thankful for that, but he could have come home. But it says a lot to the character of him and his patriotism and love of country, dedication. Very dedicated man.
Truly, he was a big hero. And with all the rest of his men too. They were all heroes.
I knew in order to write Unknown Valor, I'd have to see Iwo Jima for myself. The Japanese regained control of the island in 1968, but once a year, during the anniversary of the battle, they allow a small number of Americans to visit for a few short hours. They're there to attend the Reunion of Honor, a gathering of American and Japanese veterans and dignitaries. Both sides remember those they lost. More than 70 years after his death, I would see where Harry Gray and so many others fought and died. We boarded an early morning flight from Guam. About an hour later, Iwo Jima came slowly into view. Passengers craned their necks to get a look at Mount Suribachi, the caves carved into the rock, and the black sand beaches. Upon landing, as the veterans descended the stairs and set foot on the island once again, they were greeted by the Commandant of the Marine Corps. All saluted and shook hands. Then we set off for the 2-mile trek to Suribachi. From the top, we looked down at the landing beaches. We saw the spot where the flag was raised. It's now just a sawed-off pipe surrounded by cement. And the U.S. Memorial, where veterans and families pay their respects as they remember the nearly 7,000 Marines who gave their lives to secure this island. Further down on the island, we saw what's left of the airstrips that provided a pivotal stopover for B-29 bombers on their way to the Japanese mainland. I walked with Ron Drez, a Vietnam veteran, historian, and my co-author for this book. Ron had been to Iwo Jima multiple times as a guide for Stephen Ambrose historical tours, and he knows the battle well. He pointed out the beach where Harry, George, Charlie, and the rest of the 34th replacement draft landed back in 1945.
The approach is up an incline, up a second incline. So by the time you get there, you don't have much left.
Then Ron took me to another spot, the place where the mortars hit on March 13th. Near the upper part of the island is an area known as the Turkey Knob and the amphitheater. This is where the Japanese held out for weeks, long after the flag raising on Suribachi. Marines were still being killed as Kuribayashi's fighters rained mortars and rifle fire, fighting with a vengeance before meeting their own deaths. I walked the field where Harry died and thought about these young men. I knew from Harry's buddy George Colburn's letters to my aunt and grandfather what had happened here all those years ago. He had written to them after Harry was killed.
Dear Mrs. Gray, this is about the 5th letter I've started. I can't seem to put into writing just what I want to say. Harry and I were great buddies. I was out with him up on Iwo Jima. I was with him the day it happened. I'm sure he was killed instantly and there was no pain. He was wearing his rosary beads on his neck when it happened, and I'm sure he went to heaven. He's a brave kid.
When I returned from Iwo Jima, I got a call from a researcher friend, Dean Lawback. He asked for a picture of Harry Gray to show his friend, Charlie Gubish. We knew Charlie was in the 34th replacement draft and had also been wounded on March 13th.
When I was in the 134th replacement draft, they would use us where they needed us. So my job was picking up the dead, taking off dog tags, carrying supplies to the front lines during the night and day and stuff like that.
But it wasn't until Charlie actually saw the picture of Harry that it all came flooding back. He knew Harry well. They shared a foxhole, and he was there when the mortars hit, and Harry and another young buddy, Herman Grader, were killed that day.
In the 34th replacement draft,
Right.
Is this someone that you recognize?
Oh yeah, that was my buddy, Gray. I think his name is Gray.
He was my uncle.
He was your uncle?
He was my uncle.
And I'll tell you a story about that. He was my buddy, a foxhole buddy. He'd always call me Pop because I was 24 at that time and he was 18. He'd always say, Pop, sleep, I'll watch.
To find Charlie after all these years was not something I had ever anticipated when I began writing Unknown Valor, but his story lined up perfectly with everything we knew about that day, and he was able to tell us things about Harry we would never have known.
We had a lot of fun in that, and I'll tell you, we were off somehow that day or that, and we discovered a Japanese cave and that. And they had a bunch of rifles along the walls. So Grace said, we're gonna get souvenirs. And he jumped down there and he got rifles.
Harry did. Harry Gray.
Gray. And we all had rifles, souvenir Japanese rifles. But then when I got wounded, just like Gray, I lost everything, and they lost their stuff too.
Harry Gray wrote this letter to his mother on March 12th.
Dear Mom, I suppose you are worried to death over me. Well, I'm in the best of health and feeling fine, with the exception of a few scares. I saw George C. yesterday, and he's fine as far as I know. Mom, will you please buy Dad a nice corsage for Easter and have the tag say, to my sweetheart, with all my love, Harry. Hope everyone and everything is fine. Love, your son, Harry.
Charlie remembers the next day, March 13th. He, Harry Gray, and Herman Grader were heading to the front for the very first time. They were marching in a column of 19, carrying ammunition.
Mortar shell landed on the right-hand side, about 50 feet, and nobody paid no attention. Then there was one on the left-hand side again, about the same distance. I hollered, hit the deck. They got us right in the middle. Well, that's what killed him. I was wounded too. I was out. I'm still carrying that shrapnel in me today. I still have it in there. But Gray and Grader, they lost their lives.
And do you think that Harry Gray was killed instantly?
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that I got to meet you and that you remember him, because I've never met anyone who was with him there, and it's just remarkable to be able to talk to you about it. I can't even express it.
Weeks later, I made a second visit, this time bringing my Aunt Nancy to meet Charlie, who could finally tell her a first-hand account of what happened to her 18-year-old beloved brother.
I want to introduce you to my aunt. This is Nancy Gray Shade.
Gray?
Yes.
What, Aunt?
Nancy.
Can I give you a hug?
Yeah. I'm glad to see you.
I'm so delighted to meet you.
You're great.
It's been a long time coming.
Right.
74 years.
Well, you're great.
My brother was Harry Gray.
He was very honest about what happened after the mortars hit.
they laid their dead Gray. He was hit with a shrapnel right on the side of his head.
Oh, really?
He had about an inch or two scar where the shrapnel was in his brains, and that's what killed him.
I never knew that. I often wondered, you know, really what happened.
Yeah.
These two people, 70 years later, share a bond of the loss and horrors of war, of friends and brothers, and of some scars that never heal.
Thank you so much, George. I'm going to cry.
Okay, you too.
I will treasure this and treasure you, treasure this memory. I really will. It's been wonderful meeting you and talking with you.
Yeah, thank you.
It really has been.
I'm sorry that what happened.
I was getting close to finishing Unknown Valor, but I decided to go through George Colburn's file one more time. Late one night, I found a document, George's request for his Marine records. He had moved from New England to Florida, and unfortunately, they'd been lost. But there was an address, and soon we had a phone number. George was alive at 93 years old, the same age his old buddy Harry Gray would be. When George and I connected, I told him I was Harry Gray's niece. He wept and told me he thought about Harry all the time.
We boarded the Russian boat, and that's where I ended up buddy more with Harry, and we were all very close, all of us. We thank God we had each other, you know.
George and Harry were inseparable.
It seemed like the lieutenant knew Harry and I more than anybody else, because it was Gray and Colburn.
Similarly, back home, a letter from one almost assuredly meant a letter from the other.
We had written home, you know, and Harry would say, I saw George, we were together here, there, you know, we were together. And I'd write home, I was with Harry. And my mother called his mother. We got a letter from George. He said Harry's with them, they were here, they were on Anahuac Island and that. And we had a great time and this and that. You know.
There were good times.
They got us over to Anahuac, which is in the Marshall Islands. And I remember Harry and I and a couple of other kids, they allowed us to go ashore. And we had kind of a beer party. The captain broke out the beer, and we had a great time out in the island there.
But the bad memories followed closely behind. One of the hardest days for him was the day of my uncle's death.
We were laying in a crater, me and Harry, wondering what the hell do we go, where do we go from here, you know? And a kid, some of the Marine come out and he yelled, hey Gray, they want you over in headquarters. He gave me a quick hug and he took off. We ended up on a ridge. A little further down, there was about 15 of us on that ridge, and Harry was one of them. He was like maybe from here to the door away from me. And they yelled, hey Colburn, you still with it? And I, yeah, I'm with it, Gray, you know, and back and forth like that. That was March 13th, I think, because that's the night that we had an awful mortar attack. One of them landed right between Harry and the kid next to him. Killed both of them. He never cried out. So I know he died instantly, you know. He never... And I went down the line, hey, your buddy got killed. I know. And his body was over there, and I went over and I wanted to kick him, like, why did you do this? You know, don't you know I love you? I never saw him again. We just love one another so much, more than brotherly love, I think. You know, he just, how could he do this? I was so damn mad at him. To my recollection, when we were leaving, how they did it, I have no idea. There were 7,000 crosses, white crosses, at the top of that island. And the names of every kid that's there on the ground. We're only kids, but we were still tear-eyed, you know, about the kids we had to leave there. They were just like us, high school kids. Jesus, 6 months before I was on Iwo Jima, I was taking a girl to the Medford High School senior prom, you know, back in June. And here I am, holy Jesus, what happened, you know?
Private Harry Gray, along with Dominic Grossi and thousands of other Marines, would be buried on Iwo Jima. Harry and Dominic never met, as far as I know, but quartermaster records show that when the graves were exhumed and their bodies sent home in May of 1945, Harry to Boston and Dominic to New York, their names lined up alphabetically, and they sailed home side by side. "75 years have passed since the last days of World War II. Lives have been lived, children and grandchildren born, but when the men of Iwo Jima reflect, they still wonder sometimes why they were spared and others were not. My aunt and I showed Charlie Harry's wallet. We looked at the pictures he kept and the prayer he wrote. It was sent home to Massachusetts along with his ID bracelet from his sweetheart, Dot. The reunion and the memories that surface are a mixed blessing.
I don't want to ever have to go through this anymore, you know? I just don't want it. You don't get over it. It'll take me a couple of days to get all of this out of me.
I have flashbacks about once or twice a month. You scare the hell out of your wife. Maybe end up on the floor out of bed and sweat. Oh, yeah.
Rondo Sharf has been back to Iwo Jima before and was with us on the 74th anniversary.
I went to pay my respects to two of my buddies that got killed, you know. So I'm standing over their grave and looking down at them, and I say to them, you guys, I've had a chance to be married and live a good life, and you guys never got a chance to enjoy that. And I think, you know, what we should do is you guys come up and I'll go down there and I'll stay down there for a weekend, and you guys get a chance to live the kind of life that I live, you know, and see what it was all about. But don't go AWOL on me. You come back, because I don't want to stay down here.
Woody Williams has spent his life honoring the men we lost, spearheading the building of memorials across the country. At 96 years old, he is the only living Medal of Honor recipient from World War II.
A lot of people wanted to get into the war to, not necessarily to fight a war, but to protect our country.
It's a horrible thing, war, you know. But what we had to do at the time to keep our country free.
May the memory of these men sustain us all and remind us of their sacrifice to secure our freedom. May we never forget their bravery and all they gave up so that we might live free. We are forever indebted to these heroes, whose unknown valor we are obligated to know.
There you go. Unknown Valor came out in February of 2020. And at the same time, the Iwo Jima Association of America had a gala event in Washington, D.C., commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima. General Berger, the Commandant of Marine Corps, was guest speaker. Martha was there. I was there with my Joe. Joe's wife Holly was there. Members of my family, members of Dominic Rossi's family. It was an unbelievable event. We were so honored to meet some of these people. And so I have a short clip, and I want you to see this in regard to the event. If you could, please.
Iwo Jima survivors from all across the country recently gathered in our nation's capital to commemorate the 75th anniversary of that battle. The events, organized by the Iwo Jima Association of America, culminated in a gala Saturday night to honor those heroes and those who did not make it back home. I had the privilege of being there as two men who served alongside my uncle Harry Gray, George Colburn and Charlie Gubish, reunited for the first time in 75 years. Watch this.
Do you remember this guy named George Colburn? This is my Uncle Charlie. All right, you haven't seen him in 75 years. We were all in that area together, and we're getting pinned down all the goddamn time.
I know that.
Good to see you, kid. Good to see you.
George, remember you told me that you called Charlie Pop?
Yep. Well, you were a little older than that.
I was 101 now.
Oh, Marco, you're doing all right. Hanging right here. Where we were on Iwo was, we were in the same area with each other all the time. We called him Pop, but he was the greatest Marine going, you know? And we devoted to each other so well. You didn't shake hands with him, you hugged him. My best friend, Harry Gray, got killed there. Why? Why me? Why them? Not me? You know, or why? It's something that goes with being a veteran in the war, you know. How come, you know, and I had the closest guys. There's nothing closer than two guys, the Marine Corps and combat. They both depend on each other for their very lives.
Tonight is really about camaraderie. It's about remembering, it's about thinking of those who didn't make it back. Tonight we called off all the names.
George Colburn, Charles Gubish.
But as someone pointed out, there's a lot who did not make it back. That battle came to define sacrifice, tenacity, human courage. Uncommon valor was a common virtue. Your legacy is the young Marines who proudly follow in your footsteps. The Marines who are deployed tonight while we're in this room, this all comes from you. That's the legacy of Iwo Jima.
It's hard to express the honor it was to attend that and see 45 Marine veterans. And there's a picture of my Uncle Charlie with General Berger. General Berger went around the room to every Iwo Jima veteran and spent time with him. And we got to meet him over here, and it's hard to express just what went on. You've got a little example of that. When Uncle Charlie turned 103 years old, General Berger sent him a nice note in regard to celebrating his birthday, and one of the most profound statements in that particular letter was the words, "Charlie, you saw firsthand the true meaning and uncommon valor in Iwo Jima." Next chart. Uncle Charlie was buried in Holy Savior Cemetery in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania with military honors. And on one of the bouquets of flower was a note from Martha McCullum. I'd like to read it to you, if I can. And it says, "Charlie Gubish was a hero, a man of unknown valor, whose heroism I was honored to tell and witness. Thank you for your service, Charlie. Raise a glass up there with Harry. With love, Martha McCullum." Next chart. So, in my closing thoughts that I want to leave you with here this morning on regard to this particular presentation is that there are many stories in this audience right here that need to be told. All right, if it wasn't for Martha McCullum and the connection with her Uncle Harry Gray, and Harry being the foxhole buddy of Uncle Charlie, we would have known anything about Uncle Charlie other than he was in Iwo Jima. Now there's a way to do this here, at the Warhawk that's very simple to tell your story. And we have a program, Carson mentioned it, it's called the Veterans History Project. And we have a special room that's designed to do that. And what's really important here is that we're in conjunction with the Library of Congress. They want to record veterans' stories. And it's something that you really need to think about, and I highly recommend that you do. And there's a simple reason. Your families want to know your story. And if you look over there to the left, raise your hand, there's Ken Rhodes, and there's Don Bittler. And they have a very simple contact form. You fill it out, we'll call you, and we'll set up the interview. You get a copy, we get a copy, and by the way, we have over 1,400 copies, interviews that we've done, and have copies in our vault. And of course, the library gets a copy, and you can get copies for your family. Next chart. So in closing, there's a nice picture of my Uncle Charlie with his Purple Heart. He was a great uncle, he was a great Marine, so proud of him. Semper Fi, Uncle Charlie, and thank you very much for letting me tell the story.